gentlemen, very good morning to you and welcome. 5 years ago, almost to the day, I stood before you here on this podium, in this venue, to welcome you to what was then our first Teaching and Learning Conference convened by the new Teaching and Learning Office. It was actually the third conference hosted by UKZN, but our first under the banner of the new Teaching and Learning Office. Since then, the conference has moved from Edgewood to Pietermaritzburg to Westville, and then last year to Howard College. And with each migration came a mutation in the character, the size, the shape of the conference, the themes. And perhaps we should look back and see where we started and where we are at.
Sanbonani, in the warm eastern coast of South Africa, lies the beautiful province of KwaZulu-Natal. Located there is the premier university of African scholarship. This is the University of KwaZulu-Natal.
I think historically, teaching and learning has been one of the central pillars of a university since the beginning of universities. Teaching and learning preceded, I think, research as a pillar of the university portfolios.
One of the biggest challenges facing our university today is placing teaching and learning at the core of their endeavors, finding ways to improve the learning experiences of students and improving their levels of academic achievement.
It is no longer a debate that we need to have indigenous languages developed and become part of formal education and part of higher learning. That issue is established now.
Bilinguals are thus able to apply syntax, this is the important thing, apply syntax rules more skillfully than monolinguals because of an awareness of two languages which draws attention to the systems of both languages. Because the curriculum itself does and must shift in higher education, we anticipated that a curriculum must be responsive to new knowledge development.
What is elitism? How is it institutionally cultivated, and what are the near long-term effects?
If words are in context, then it means morphology should be studied in context.
The student is paying for what they think is an education. They not necessarily think they're paying for us to apply our expertise to social problems, although maybe they do understand that. We wouldn't do what we should do if they weren't forcing us to do so. But what they're forcing us to do isn't what we should be doing. This is the problem. Woke up this morning, getting ready for class. Feeling pretty good, but I know that won't last. My first of the day in the class is with Professor Drone. He tells me what I need to learn about what is known. This sure ain't active learning, but it's easy to assess, 'cause if I listen, write, and memorize, I'll pass all the tests. We live, thankfully, in a democracy, sometimes more democratic than other times, but one thing about a democracy is we have political processes because we have competing interests, and it's never pretty.
Each year when we identify the theme of the conference, we more or less try to think about what are the issues that academics on the ground, as it were, are raising, thinking about, and what are the issues coming up nationally.
I have the pleasant task this morning of actually welcoming and introducing Professor Noel Goff. So he asks and challenges us that in much of our curriculum work we are filling in blank spots rather than trying to examine what's in our blind spot.
To support social and cultural policies and practices, we must ask, why should descriptions of the physical or natural world be prescriptions for social life? Shifting now the attention to complexity reduction in higher education. Complexity invites us to understand our physical and social worlds as open, recursive, organic, non-linear and emergent. and to be cautious of complying with models and trends that assume linear thinking, control and predictability.
I will give examples and the strategy of selected countries they used for the reforms and how to implement them. And fifth, I will talk about then the changes in everyday life in doctoral education down in the department level.
Nelson R. Mandela School of Medicine signs an MOU in the Steve Biko Memorial Lecture Theatre, and I thought, wow, Steve must be jumping in his grave in seeing that transformation in the medical school. He sought to fight apartheid.
African scholarship. What is African scholarship? To me, African scholarship must be geared towards what one might call reclaiming space of indigenous knowledge systems, particularly now in the current knowledge economy era.
One of the lines that is still echoing in my head is that the essence of tyranny is the denial of complexity.
We were particularly frustrated by the intransigence of the administration to take steps to give attention to complaints raised by both staff and students. This prompted me to give a notice of motion at one of the meetings of COMSA, namely that the administration were in a state of paralysis and that we would presume that rigor mortis had set in if no immediate action was taken.
So I've lived through the many incarnations that marked its history. And when I tell you the time that Herbie started off and spent in higher education, when he started off as a student at UDW at Fort Hare to his retirement, and my own years, it comes to 110 years.
This conference then was conceived as an opportunity for a reality check. In the context of a rapid, unfettered internationalization thrust.
So we decided to go to the Chancellor, which was Kaiser Matanzima. He was a Chancellor of the university. I was so naive in those days, I believed that if the principal was stealing money, the Chancellor was not stealing money. How do you incentivize a system?
Who is Jamil? Professor Jamil Salmi is a global tertiary education expert, providing policy advice and consulting services to several governments, universities, multilateral banks, and bilateral agencies.
Universities will reach out to kindergartens to motivate the future engineers. In the future, all incoming new students will get a free iPad or Kindle with all the textbooks for the 4 years of their studies. Now you may think that I'm telling you science fiction stories, right? I can assure you that each and every one of the examples I just gave is a real-life case that I encountered in one of my journeys throughout the world. And I believe they are symbolic of the revolution that higher education is going through.
Is it only one way? If there's an Edinburgh UKZN partnership, which let's hope there is it to build your capacity, or is it not, as the Chinese would say, to build somebody talking in class? I mean, we can't have that. This is TNL. Are you all right, sir?
So that will have aroused some familiar memories. We've lost some time, so I'm going to push ahead. I want to welcome all of you, UKZN staff, academic staff, support staff from other universities in South Africa, Southern Africa, and the continent. And let me, on your behalf, welcome especially a few of our guests, notably Professor Philip Altbach, who will address you shortly, from Boston College. Professor Guy Standing, are you here yet, Guy? Not yet, but he's around. Professor Paulus Gerardus. Is Paulus? Yes, right at the back. Thank you. Welcome, Paulus. And somebody who is with us, but not quite for the conference, a special guest from Aston University, a corpus linguist specialist, Professor Ramesh Krishnamurthy, and he's here to take part in a parallel corpus building workshop that's being hosted by the Department of Linguistics. I will return shortly to this podium to make a few announcements, but I'd like to hand you over now to our DVC Teaching and Learning, Professor Renuka Vital, to open this conference.